John, I sometimes say to myself in a quiet voice I barely recognize anymore, you've lived long enough to finally stop looking for complicated explanations where everything was always simple. You know, when you're 77, memory becomes like an old family album where some photographs have faded to white, while others, on the contrary, have gained such sharpness that it almost hurts. But here's the strange thing. With time, you begin to understand that the most important people in your life are not the ones with whom you weathered storms or in whose fire you burned to the ground. They are the ones with whom you never had to prove that you were worthy of love. We are used to thinking that a real feeling has to be loud. That's what books taught us, films taught us, youth itself taught us. Youth that forever longs for drama. We looked for confirmation, waited for feats, demanded vows and daily proof that we wouldn't be abandoned. We measured the depth of love by the level of tension, believing that the more painful and complicated it was, the more real it must be. But now, looking at all this from the height of my years, I see how deeply we were mistaken. True love, the kind that withstands decades, is free from this need for illustrations. It does not demand a report for every step, does not ask you to become a better version of yourself every minute, does not force you to earn tenderness. It is simply a state of being together. It is a feeling of complete safety where you can be tired, boring, confused, or even completely silent. And it will change nothing. Once I thought that if there was no spark in a relationship constantly feeding the fire, then it was merely habit. But over the years, I understood the difference. Habit is when you don't care. And this calm love is when you feel so good that you stop noticing the very mechanics of the feeling, just as we don't notice our own breathing until something happens that takes our breath away. I look at you now and see that familiar desire to find something grand, something that will turn the world upside down. It's natural. But let me tell you one thing. The most important connections in my life were quiet. They did not require words, did not require fierce arguments or stormy reconciliations. They simply were. And they are the ones that stayed with me when everything else, ambitions, bright passions, loud promises, dissolved like morning mist over the ocean. Where there is no need to prove, there, my friend, is the true home for your soul. I was about 28 when I first felt that strange restlessness, the fear that my life was becoming too understandable. At that age, it seems that if you are not suffocating from emotions, then you are not truly living. You look for drama because drama gives the illusion of the importance of your existence. There was a woman by my side. Her name was Anne. With her, everything was incredibly simple. You know, it was the kind of simplicity that youth often mistakes for banality. We could sit in silence for hours, and that silence was not heavy. I didn't need to invent witty remarks to entertain her, didn't need to justify my bad mood or my fatigue after work. She simply accepted my presence as a given, and I accepted hers. There were no scenes in our life, no phone checks, none of those late-night conversations in raised voices about where we are going. We were simply going. But that was the trap. I would look at her and think, is that all? Isn't love supposed to be like a storm? Then another person appeared in my field of vision. She was like an electric shock. Every meeting with her was a battle. We could argue ourselves hoarse over some trifle, part forever, and then come close again in some mad impulse. When she didn't call, I felt physical pain, which I mistook for the depth of feelings. When we were together, I felt tension in every nerve, and it seemed to me that this was the real spark. It was complicated, it was exhausting, and therefore it seemed incredibly valuable to me. I believed that if something came at such a price, it must carry enormous weight. I remember one evening, I returned to Anne after another emotional wreck with that other one. I was squeezed dry like a lemon, angry at the whole world and at myself. Anne just looked at me without a single question, without a hint of suspicion or a desire to pull a confession out of me. She simply placed a plate of dinner in front of me and sat down beside me, reading her book. And do you know what I felt at that moment? Irritation. It seemed to me that her calmness was a sign of indifference. I wanted her to ask where I had been, to interrogate me, to fight for me. I sat in that silence and thought, it's too bland here. There's no life here. I sincerely believed that love was when you were turned inside out, not when you were simply given peace when you needed it. I did not devalue Anne. No, I considered her wonderful, reliable, my person. But in my head at that time, there was a clear hierarchy. There was comfortable stability, and there was real love. And real love necessarily had to taste like blood on your lips and sleepless nights. I was convinced that complexity was a synonym for depth. If I am not suffering, then I am not loving strongly enough. If I don't have to prove anything, then the feeling has no challenge, and therefore it does not develop me. How wrong I was in defining challenge. I thought a challenge was taming someone's difficult temper or enduring an emotional storm. In reality, the greatest challenge was to understand that true strength lies in the ability to be happy without unnecessary noise. Back then, I looked at Anne and saw only the absence of conflict. I did not see in it her choice, the choice to love me without conditions or demands. I took her ease for granted, like the air you breathe and remember only when you begin to suffocate. It seemed to me that I was too complicated for such simple happiness. I searched for hidden reefs where there was a clear bottom. Youth is very selfish in its pursuit of complexity. We want to be the heroes of our own novel, and heroes are meant to suffer. A calm life with someone who simply loves you does not look like a plot for a bestseller. And I, John, who was not yet 30 then, was ready to trade this priceless calm for any storm, just to feel that I was truly living. I do not repent for those thoughts, no. It was part of the journey. I just now want to approach that boy and say, you are looking for fire to warm yourself, but you don't notice that you are already standing in the sun. But he would not have heard me. He was too busy searching for proof where it was absolutely unnecessary. 10, 20, 30 years passed. Time stopped running and began to flow, growing thicker, like warm resin. In the middle of life, you suddenly discover that your inner world no longer resembles a construction site where something is constantly being built or demolished. It becomes like a garden where the main thing is not the speed of growth, but the depth of the roots. It was then, somewhere between 40 and 60, that I began to notice how the quality of our silence was changing. Once it seemed to me like emptiness that needed to be filled with words, tasks, or music. Now, it became our support. There was a period, probably the hardest in my career and inner state, when I felt completely exhausted. It was not sharp pain or a sudden catastrophe. It was a long, gray fatigue that eroded meaning. I would come home with the feeling that I was nobody, that everything I had built was just a house of cards. In such moments, youth demands conversations. It demands that you be comforted, that you be told how wonderful you are, that every detail of your fall be analyzed with you. But Anne did something entirely different. She did not try to fix me. She did not demand explanations for why my eyes had dimmed or why I had become so gloomy. She simply stayed beside me, allowing me to be that way, broken and uninteresting. For the first time, I understood that the greatest manifestation of love is not when you are inspired to heroic deeds, but when you are allowed not to be a hero, when the absence of drama becomes your only safe refuge. I watched my friends. I saw their great stories collapse, the same stories I once secretly admired, with passionate breakups, flights to other countries for reconciliation, intellectual duels, and the endless search for truth in a partner's eyes. They sought depth in tension, but tension has its limit. It breaks. Their connections crumbled under the weight of their own complexity. It turned out that when you constantly demand proof of love's uniqueness, it simply gets tired of being on display. It burns out, leaving behind only ashes and mutual accusations, and we simply lived. And in that ordinariness, I suddenly began to see incredible beauty. You know, it's like breathing. You don't think about it while your lungs work properly. Our love was so built into the structure of my day that I stopped analyzing it. I no longer needed to explain myself. You know that feeling when you don't have to choose your words to be understood correctly? When you can say only half a sentence or simply sigh, and the person beside you already knows everything you wanted to say. It's not magic. It's simply the result of thousands of days lived without trying to seem like someone else. I began catching myself thinking, maybe I confused the concepts all my life. What I considered depth in youth was only the amplitude of oscillations. The stronger you are shaken from happiness to despair, the deeper the feeling seems. But real depth is not a storm. It is the ocean far from shore, where the surface may be absolutely calm, but beneath it lie kilometers of unmoving mass of water. This absence of the need to prove your love to another or to yourself became my main discovery. I would look at Anne simply going about her business and feel such a strong thread between us that no vow or most expensive gift could create it. We went through crises, through illnesses of loved ones, through financial failures, and not once did we question that we were together. Not because we were so righteous or holy, but because we had nothing to defend. Love that does not require proof has no weak spots, because it has no front line on which to fight. I saw how time erased the sharp corners of my character. I became softer, perhaps a little slower, but much clearer in my desires, and my main desire was to preserve this quiet rhythm. I realized that all those bright flashes of the past were only sparks that quickly died out because they had nothing to hold on to, and this simple, boring stability turned out to be the highest form of freedom. The freedom to be yourself without fear of being rejected for your ordinariness. When you are 50 or 60, you no longer look for confirmation of your attractiveness or intellect in another's eyes. It is enough that someone knows all your weaknesses, all your petty habits, all your failed jokes, and still remains in the room when you enter it, without pathos, without unnecessary words. This realization came to me slowly, like dawn on a cloudy day, but when it finally illuminated everything around, I understood I was finally home. And this home is built not from passion, but from trust so absolute that it becomes invisible. Now that I am 77, I notice more and more often how memory plays strange games with me. I may forget what I had for breakfast or the name of the neighbor I greeted for 10 years in a row, but feelings remain as sharp as ever. They say that love is what we remember, but I think it's the opposite. Love is what remains when you have already forgotten everything. When I look back at our life with Anne, I do not see great victories or heroic achievements. I see a long, even road. And do you know what its greatest value was? That I never had to look back to check whether she was still walking beside me. She was there, always, without conditions, without loud vows, without the need to prove anything to the world or to each other. I understood this too late, but fortunately, I managed to feel it. True closeness is not when you look at each other without taking your eyes away, but when you both calmly look in the same direction, and you are not afraid to close your eyes. You are not afraid to be weak. You are not afraid to be forgotten by the world, because you know that in this small universe for two, you are always in your place. We spend so much energy in youth trying to impress, to conquer, to hold on. We build barricades of proof of our love because we are afraid that without them, it will disappear. But time is a very honest judge. It washes away everything loud, everything created for spectators, and it leaves only what was real. It turns out that the most faithful love is the one that simply endured life together with you, without strain, without pathos, like quiet breathing and sleep. Now, sitting here, I feel a strange, deep happiness. It is not like the excitement I felt at 20. This happiness is quiet, like evening light. I know that my days are coming to an end, and many details of my story will soon dissolve into darkness. But this does not frighten me, because the main thing I understood, that connection which required no explanations, has already become part of me. It is stronger than memory. Do not seek complexity, my friend. Do not seek a love that demands constant sacrifices or perfection from you. Seek the one in which you are allowed to be simply human, where nothing needs to be proven. There is your home. And when you find it, you will understand that everything else was only noise.